Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Be Neighbors, a program with Salt Lake County Library System, where we discuss topics of importance to the community with local experts. Tonight, we're featuring veterans and their families, not only how they've served, but also the impact their service has on their lives and those closest to them, and in turn, how we can serve those who have so willingly served us. We'll hear from three fantastic presenters. First, we'll hear from Emily Harrison. While seeing the great need for relevant and reliable information and resources for military families as a volunteer in her husband's unit Family Readiness Group, FRG, Emily turned her passion for family readiness into a career supporting military families for the last 20 plus years. Emily now serves as the director for the Utah chapter of Blue Star Families, serving Utah's military and veteran families. Next, we'll hear from Susan Grayzel and Molly Cannon. Susan R. Grayzel, PhD, is a professor of history at Utah State University, whose work focuses on the history of total war, modern European history, and gender and women's history. She has published extensively on these topics, and her recent research on material culture and modern war appears in her forthcoming book, The Age of the Gas Mask: How British Civilians Face the Terrors of Total War, due out in September with Cambridge University Press. Molly Cannon, PhD, serves as director for the Utah State University Museum of Anthropology and the Mountain West Center for Regional Studies. Her research and teaching involve understanding life in the Mountain West. She approaches this work through ethnography, archaeology, museum studies, and community engagement. Susan and Molly will discuss oral histories and the Bringing War Home project. If you're just coming in, please put in how many people are viewing from your device and feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation. All right, let's get started. Turning it over to you, Emily.
Hi, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm Emily Harrison. I'm the director for Blue Star Families of Utah. You can go to the next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about Blue Star Families and just myself, my experience. I'm currently a veteran spouse and a caregiver. My husband retired from 22 years of active duty service in 2017, and he's a disabled veteran. I am his caregiver. I'm also the daughter of two World War II veterans. Both my grandfathers served, my one grandfather in the Army Air Corps, my other in the U.S. Navy. And my one grandfather was in the Navy. He's actually a nuclear veteran and actually died from complications and exposures to nuclear radiation during his time when he was serving. So I didn't really get a chance to ever speak with him directly about his military service since I was only 5 years old when he died. But my grandfather, that was in the Army Air Corps, talked extensively about his service when I was a child. So it really gave me just really positive feelings about the military and his service. During my time living with him, my grandparents, those particular grandparents, lived with us. So never expected to be a military spouse myself, but just kind of like my background with living with a veteran kind of came into play once I married my service member. But 20 years of experience in the space. I was actually embedded for 10 of those years in Army units, working directly with our soldiers in units. And then I've been with Blue Star Families for the last 3 years. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk a little bit about Blue Star Families for those who may not be familiar with us. We're a national nonprofit organization, and so I'm the director here for the Utah chapter. And our mission is to build strong communities of support around military families and veteran families to improve our overall military readiness and just general wellness and in our community. And how we do that is that we listen, share, partner, and act. So we identify the challenges that our military families face through our national survey every year, and we take that data and we translate it, and then we put it into action by sharing it with military and civilian communities. And then we partner at the local and national level to support military connected families, which includes veterans. And then we act by delivering programs and events and resources to address those challenges that we identified. Next slide. So just a little snapshot of Blue Star Families nationally. We have 11 funded chapters across the United States that has a director like myself that provides programs to the community. We have 2 new chapters coming online this year in Seattle and the Boston area, but we also have volunteer-led efforts throughout the nation. So just a little snapshot. Next slide. Just a little snapshot of Utah chapter specifically. We serve a 65-mile radius from the center of Salt Lake City. Includes a huge area here in northern Utah that includes like 12 counties and 164 unique zip codes. So we're pretty huge. But just to kind of take a look at the military population that we have here, we just over 4,500 active duty military members. And just over 12,000 between our National Guard and Reserve. But our veteran population here in the state of Utah is actually the largest by far. The last known count that we have is just over 150,000. That count's a couple of years old now. We don't have more recent data than that, but we know that the population of veterans here in the state of Utah is growing. And it's by far our biggest population. Next slide. So we're primarily a programs-based organization. And so we work to deliver those programs here locally in the community. This is across all of our chapter and neighborhood locations. Kind of the numbers around delivering some of the programs that we have, our museum program, our outdoors program. We have a caregiver program for veteran spouses, Blue Star Books program. So just a little bit of the reach that we have. We currently have just over 9,000 volunteers across the nation. But really, what I wanted to talk about here this evening, next slide, please, is our data that we get each year through our annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey. I really feel like you can't really have a good discussion around how to support veterans or in the community unless you actually know what they need. So that's why we have done this survey every year since Blue Star Families was founded back in 2009. We've always been a very data-driven organization because that's the only way that we can effectively serve our families if we know, what their needs are. So I'm going to take you through some of the findings of our survey and go to the next slide. This year, I just had over 8,000 respondents, a little bit lower than our average survey respondent rate. And we feel like the pandemic has a little bit to do with that. We're normally up over 11,000. But some key takeaways for people who may not be military or veteran affiliated. So our civilian population, some of the key takeaways that we see each year and the trends is that military families continue to experience frequent separations from their service member. Military spouses face unemployment rates that are 4 times the national average. And we see this bleed over when military spouses become the spouses of veterans. They take all of those employment issues that they had with them when their service member was actively serving. They take that into their with them when their service member becomes a veteran, whether it's gaps in their resume or just odd career things with their career because of their spouse's service. That doesn't go away once their spouse becomes a veteran. Spouse underemployment is a top contributor to financial stress because of the issues with frequent moves and gaps in resumes, or not being able to work for various different reasons, to include childcare, which remains a barrier to spouse unemployment. It just creates issues where spouses often find themselves underemployed. And then lastly, most of our military kids are thriving. Our military children tend to be really resilient despite frequent moves. But we're seeing that COVID-19 really had a big toll on our military children. And we're experiencing a lot of barriers to mental health care in relation to that. Next slide. So this is where we kind of get into the meat of the data that we get out of this survey. We ask families to identify their top 5 issues. And a lot of these issues are things that we see repeatedly year over year. It tends to be some of the same issues. They tend to be ranked differently each year. So this is from our active duty family respondents, military spouse employment being that top issue, followed by time away from family, dependent children's education, relocation, PCS issues, and military pay. Next slide. We break this survey data down for each component. So this is for our reserve families reporting time away from family, even though reserve service members are not active duty. They still have a lot of training requirements. They still get mobilized and called up for various different missions or natural disasters. So even though they may not be deploying to a combat zone, they're still spending a lot of time away from family. And then the impacts of those deployments or mobilizations on family are the next stressor. Military spouse employment, even for reserve families, most reserve families tend to be in one location for a longer period of time, but just by nature of the fact that they are still considered military spouses, they still have barriers to employment, just like the active duty component. Military benefits is the 4th one there. And then what we see a lot in a trend is as an issue for our military families is civilian understanding of military and veteran issues. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit more later on. Next slide. This is our National Guard, pretty similar to our reserve population, time away from family, impacts of deployment, pay, benefits, and then again, that civilian understanding of military and veteran issues. Next slide. So this is where we get into our veteran responses. So these tend to look a lot different because it's a different population and they deal with different issues. So their top issue is obviously access to military and VA healthcare systems. It continues to be a big issue with our veteran families and our veteran service members. Even though we've made a lot of strides in VA healthcare over the last few years, there's still a system that needs a lot of work, and we're definitely seeing that each year with this survey, and it's been a top issue for the last several years. For veterans, civilian understanding of military and veteran issues is actually ranked higher than their active duty or National Guard Reserve components. So they report just that at a higher rate that's an issue for them in their local community. Veteran unemployment would be next. Whoops, sorry. And then service member, veteran, family member mental health. It's a big challenge for our veteran population. Their healthcare is a little bit different. It's not like on the active duty side where they can where they get all of their healthcare for free, even though the service member may be able to utilize the VA for their healthcare needs, the spouse cannot. And that creates some issues as a family when you're trying to access mental health care and resources, and then military benefits being that last one. Next slide. So just some data around like our post 9/11 veterans. We're seeing that on average, they show a little bit stronger employment and financial positions than their older veteran counterparts. So that's definitely a good trend, but we're also seeing that they do tend to change jobs a lot once they separate from the military or retire. They change jobs more frequently. And then also the higher their disability rating seems to have a direct effect on their ability to get and maintain employment. So that's some issues that we're seeing. Next slide. This is just a slide on COVID impacts. We did a separate survey kind of at the height of the pandemic in a pain points poll. So this was separate from our military family survey data, but just kind of shows a breakdown of the various issues that people were reporting, or various aspects of their life, and how the degree to which COVID-19 actually changed the following areas. So children's education was huge, obviously, with kids having to go to school virtually, or a lot of families chose to homeschool children due to the pandemic. Overall happiness, personal mental health, children's mental health, all these things were showing being much worse with the pandemic, as you would imagine, but kind of gives you a good snapshot of where they were ranking themselves during that time. Next slide. So mental health is always important in the conversation when we're talking about veterans. This is just some data that came out of our survey that 40% of veteran respondents report that they don't get enough sleep to function effectively, which is, if you're not sleeping, that has effects across all areas of your life. And then also 14% of veteran family respondents would like to receive mental health care, but currently do not. And there is a lot of different reasons for that. Veterans report that it's too difficult to schedule an appointment, or they don't want medication. They have concerns about confidentiality, or that the treatment isn't sensitive to their needs. And on the veteran spouse side, they also find it's difficult to schedule appointments, and that mental health care costs too much money. Again, they're not provided their health care the same way that our active duty military families do. So even if they do have like a TRICARE for life, there's still copays, and mental health care is actually considered specialty care. So those copays are much higher than just regular like care from your primary care doctor. Many don't know where to get help, and they also find that treatment's not sensitive to their needs. Next slide. Food insecurity is actually a big issue amongst not only our military families, but also our veteran families, and especially here in the state of Utah. We find that for the last couple years of our survey, when we look at the Utah-specific data, it actually trends higher than all of our other chapter locations. We see about a 27%, or 27% of military or veteran-connected families report that they are food insecure here in Utah, which is it hovers around between 18 to 20% in some of our other chapter locations. So I think there's a lot of reasons why that is, that are specific to Utah and everything that's going on right now with the housing crisis and inflation. So I anticipate that we'll probably see this as a trend that will continue to grow. But right now we have about 12% or 1 in 8 veteran family respondents report low or very low food security in the last 12 months. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. So food insecurity is actually something that we do a lot of work on here in Utah chapter, providing events throughout the year to provide additional opportunities for military and veteran families to obtain food in a setting that's less intimidating than other than getting assistance through other organizations where they feel like maybe they're potentially being tracked or that information is being reported back to governmental agencies. So we do tend to do a lot of work there. Next slide. And then I just wanted to show this slide because it really kind of shows how our veterans feel about living in some of their local communities. So right now we're seeing if 48% of veteran families are reporting that they feel a sense of belonging to their local civilian community, which means that that's less than half of our veterans actually feel welcome and they belong to their local community. And I really think that speaks volumes. You should be able to feel welcome and belong to the community in which you live in, and that's not currently a situation that more than half of our veterans have. So I think that's a telling statistic that we really need to take a look at and work on. And then 26% feel that the civilians in their local community understand their sacrifices. So again, that's only 26%. So there's a large percentage of our veterans that feel that the general civilian population doesn't really understand the sacrifices that they made during their military service. So next slide. So this is kind of a big instead of making a separate slide for each of these different things, I kind of just stuck it all on one. So there's a lot to unpack here. But essentially, we have a model here, our theory of change model, which is listen, share, partner, and act. And that's really what I wanted to talk about tonight, in that this is the same model that people, everyday folks in their communities, can actually use to reach out to veterans and actually serve them in the communities in which they live. So anybody can reach out to veterans. They are everywhere. There's a lot of veterans here in the state of Utah. You probably know them from your local communities, within your own wards or your church. But reach out to them, talk to them, ask them to share their stories. I think a lot of times I see this all the time out in the community, where civilians will thank veterans for their service, and they're just like, "Oh, thank you for your service," and they walk away. But how many times do you actually stop and talk to a veteran and ask them about about them and to share their story? Not all veterans love to talk about certain aspects of their service, but typically if you ask them about their service, they'll tell you a little bit about their service, where they served, who they served with. And so just listen and ask them if their story's been written down. And notice that part of it's going to be covered by our other speakers, so I won't get into that too much. But I think that's an important piece, that going forward, as our veteran population ages, we're losing a lot of our World War II veterans, and our coming up on our Korean veterans and our Vietnam era veterans. We're losing those stories because they haven't been told and they haven't been written down. But again, that will be covered by some of our other speakers, so I'll let them talk about that. But we have a lot of data here at Blue Star Families. All of this survey data is all available on our website at bluestarfam.org. So if you want to learn more about the military and veteran lifestyle and the struggles that military and veteran families have, all that information is available on our website. And then you can share that. You can share what you learned in this event, or with speaking with veterans. You can share that with other people in your community, friends, neighbors, family members, who might want to help. And then you can encourage them to listen, share, partner, and act as well. Um, you can share helpful resources that you may know of with veterans when you speak with them. If you can get information on the Veterans Crisis Line, you can look for other resources, within your local community, like Blue Star Families or other organizations that it might be able to help them. So when you're talking to them, you can share that information with them. Sometimes they just don't know that these things are available in their own community. And then you can partner. You can partner with local nonprofits, there's various different agencies or other groups that support our military and veteran community. We have a really robust community here of just different nonprofits and different groups. We have Battle and Betty's, Honors 365, Continue Mission, National Ability Center, Operation Hero, Wolf Creek Foundation, Utah Honor Flight, Blue Star Mothers, and VA Voluntary Services at the Salt Lake City VA. I mean, there are tons and tons. I could go on and on and on with all the different organizations that are out there. Like Blue Star Families is definitely not the only organization that works here in our community. So there are tons of places that you can go out and partner with and get more information. You can either also work within your local community in your church or community groups. There's just a lot that can be done. And you can find out how you can get involved and then share their information and resources with our veterans. And then lastly, act and just volunteer your time. Assist a veteran in need. There's so many things that can be done within this community to support our veterans. You can take mental health first aid training. So when you're interacting with veterans, if there's a veteran that's having a mental health crisis or is in need, you can talk to them and just direct them to information and resources. If you're an employer in the community, if you own a small business or you in some way employ people, you can make the effort to consider hiring veterans, consider hiring veteran spouses. It's a lot of times an untapped resource. Our veterans have a lot of skills, and the skills that they got during their military service, and they don't always get to put those skills to use. So if you can affect veteran hiring in any way, that'd be amazing. You can make in-kind or food donations to support veterans in need. There's so many different places here just in Salt Lake City that you can do that. The VA has a food bank that supports veterans. There's Valor House at the Salt Lake City VA. Excuse me, that helps our homeless veterans reintegrate back into the community and provides them housing. There's always different volunteer needs or in-kind donation needs. There's like so much that really can be done in this area. Next slide. Sorry. And just ways that you can help Blue Star families and what we do to help support military and veteran families is just to become a member. Anybody can become a member. It's absolutely free. And when you become a member, it just helps us with our numbers. It helps us attract sponsors and funders, helps us with grants so that we can continue to put on the programs here in the community. You can become a volunteer by visiting that link, or you can scan the QR codes on the screen. Next slide. And we are coming up on our survey period, so I wanted to put in a plug for that. In any way that we can get this information shared with veterans in our community, with our military population, regardless of their component, we just need people to take the survey because this is where we get all of our data, we figure out the trends, and it helps us develop our programs each year. So that survey is actually going to be opening here shortly on May 23rd. And it's easily accessible just through our website at bluestarfam.org. There's several different links and ways that you can access it, but just directing people to our survey period. It's open for about a month, starting in May. Next slide. So this is me, my contact information. If you'd like to reach out to me directly, please feel free. My email and phone number is there. And then we're also on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook is where we put like literally everything that we're doing out in the community, all of our events. And it's a great way to connect with us. You can send me a message or send me an email. And I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. We appreciate your time, all the information and resources you have shared. We'd like to now turn the time over to Susan and Molly. Thank you, Susan and Molly.
We're going to pull up our slides, but I just want to thank Emily for that presentation and all that incredibly useful information. And while we're waiting for our slides to be pulled up, I'm really struck by the issue of civilian understanding of these experiences. And I feel like that's so important. I feel like as an educator, that's one of the things that draws me to study and teach about past conflicts and to engage just our community so that we understand better what the legacy of that service is and what the impacts of that have. So it's a privilege to be following you. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about our project, which is all about capturing the stories of veterans and military families and about the legacy of military service. So we'll move to the next slide and talk a little bit about that. So Molly and I were lucky enough to apply and have learned about a year ago that we had funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which has a special program called Dialogues on the Experiences of War that really aims to use humanities sources to think about bringing together U.S. military veterans. We've expanded that to sort of think about military families, to think deeply about the issues raised by war and military service. And we decided that we wanted to do a project that centered around material culture and to think about how the things that are carried home from wars, the things that are made and gifted to those who participate in military conflicts can help us or are sort of a rich resource to learn about our shared past. So next slide. So there are objects that are collected by relatives who participate in the wars of the last centuries that linger as memorials. They help us to both remember and tell the stories of our beloved, individual family members, but also members of our communities and how they contributed to the larger history of waging war and what that means. So I don't know if this is actually visible, but I'm wearing a pin that my grandmother wore as a civil defense volunteer in the Second World War, where she was one of those people who helped keep the blackout on the East Coast because they were worried about naval attacks. And every time I wear this, I think about the incredible work that was done by those who lived through these experiences. So we really do think, in answer to this final question here, that objects really can hold memories, and that they're really an important way that we preserve the legacies of this service. So one of the things that we are doing in this project and is focusing, this is what our grant was about, was focusing in particular on two conflicts, one of which is the First World War, a war that had, it's one of the first modern total wars, had sort of mass participation, for whom that war has just faded into history, sort of leaves traces in our communities through family memory. And then the Vietnam War, because you feel like, as Emily mentioned, this is a war where those veterans are sort of aging, and if we do not get their stories, we're going to lose them. So just very briefly, these two conflicts are very important. The First World War is in many ways a forgotten war, but it had a really important impact, led to new ways of commemoration, and then lives on in the next slide in a variety of really interesting material objects, everything from gas masks, because this was the first chemical war, to the photograph in that top corner, which is actually embedded in a piece of hardtack biscuit, right? So that just tells you the quality of some of the food that was experienced, but also in commemorative plates and a variety of other ways that war has lived on in people's homes and lives. The Vietnam War obviously is a war that tore America apart. One of the things that's very powerful about the way that's been commemorated, and this is obviously a photograph of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, is that ever since that memorial opened, people have left objects there. And there's just a variety of ways in which that war has been embodied in all kinds of objects. So these are from this quite incredible website that has documented some of the things that have been left at the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial. But what's missing from the objects that are left are the stories that are accompanying them, you know, what their meaning is, why they're left. And so that's really part of what we are trying to do with our particular initiative. So in the next slide, you could, we're also quite interested in sort of civilians' experiences. So these are two material objects. They're both quilts. They come from very different conflicts. One is really a commemorative quilt, the one with all the red crosses from the First World War, you know, stitched by women in the community to preserve the memory of those who've been left by the war. And the other is from a large Agent Orange quilt, which is a commemorative quilt where Vietnam veterans who were impacted by Agent Orange and their survivors stitched commemorative pieces and sort of put them together. So there's a way in which the aim of our project is to record these material items and to take note of the stories that accompany them. And we're going around the state of Utah, visiting various communities and inviting veterans and military families to share these stories with us. And now Molly's going to share what we're about there.
Thank you, Sue. As Sue mentioned, our primary objective here is really to talk with veterans and military families and get them connected to their community in order to really share these stories. And our road shows are our primary method for making those connections. We've chosen this term purposefully because while we're very interested in material culture and objects and artifacts and souvenirs, we're not actually collecting these objects and artifacts. So we don't want your family heirlooms. We want to hear the stories about those objects. And so what we're seeing here in this slide are some of our students who are doing that work. And for me, this has been really just the most rewarding aspect of this project is to see and hear our students following one of these roadshows and the impact that they've had when they get to talk with veterans and military families about their experiences. And so what we can see kind of here in these photographs are the students you know, documenting the objects, being able to hold these objects of history and incredible meaning to the individuals, but also sitting, you know, right across from them and taking down their stories. And so tonight, what we're focused on, my slide will advance, yes, are really the story side of these road shows. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using oral history, but primarily we're here to kind of share some of our experience documenting these stories in the hopes that you'll be inspired to go home and document your own family histories and collect your own oral histories. And so we've titled this slide here called The Power of Oral History, and it really is powerful. We've just finished co-teaching this just truly remarkable course. At least for me, it was such a new experience, and it was sort of sprinkled throughout the semester of reading firsthand accounts and oral histories from men and women who've served, but also from families and children who've experienced the impacts of wartime and of conflict. And it just gives you such a really rich understanding of one's experience and of a time period that maybe you don't have a direct connection or experience with. And I think that's really the power of oral history, is it's so first person focused, and it's such a personal account that it really does kind of add to our historical understanding in a way, you know, that our rather dry academic writing just, it can't quite do, right? It cannot convey that same impact, such as what we observed here with Captain Tom McElwee, talking with our students and sharing his experience during the Second World War as the commander of a sub chaser, on the, you know, on the sort of on the day of D-Day, and just his accounts there were so moving for our students and painted such a vivid picture of what that day really was like for them to understand. So I'm going to ask you, and hopefully you can put this in the chat and you can be kind of thinking about this, but do you have a story that you want to record? Is there that one family story that you've been thinking about and you just love hearing every Thanksgiving, maybe at the dinner table, or every time you get to sit down and chat with your grandma or take a walk with a family member? What are those stories? Everybody has them. We all have them. That's what, you know, connects us and makes us part of a family and part of a community, is being able to share these stories and continually sharing them. And sometimes they evolve ever so slightly, right, over time as memory changes and shifts. But usually there's a core story that everybody wants to hear. So maybe start thinking about, what is that story that I want to record? And that's really kind of where an oral history gets started. You have something that you want to document. And an oral history, you know, it will have some central theme that you're really wanting to capture. So you'll want to spend a little bit of time kind of thinking about, what is this topic? What is the essence of the story that I want to make sure that I capture? And then as you're crafting your questions that you want to ask your person that holds this story or holds this experience, you know, kind of think about what can guide that story along, and what can kind of help them feel comfortable to start to share a little bit more, share some of the details that you know, but maybe if there's ways that you can sort of get them to think slightly differently about the experience, maybe you can capture something that they haven't necessarily shared or they haven't spent as much time on. So you want to kind of set up some questions. And as we worked with our students and we've learned through these roadshows, is that, you know, you don't want to ask them something that they can say yes or no, right? You want to ask them these kind of open-ended questions that let them kind of converse. And then you have to listen when you're collecting an oral history, because they're going to say something that you just didn't anticipate. And if you're just reading questions, you're going to miss out on something truly wonderful. So make sure that you're listening in your conversation, and kind of think about that as a conversation. We've assigned this to our students as one of their final projects in our course, was to collect an oral history with someone that they knew that lived during the Vietnam era. Remember, our students are quite young. So, for some of them, you know, this was their grandparents. And so this let them kind of experience that time from a different perspective than what they maybe understood, or the relationship that they had with their family member. And they really did approach it as a conversation with them. And when they did that, the stories that came back and the oral histories accounts that Sue and I were so privileged to get to read, they were remarkable, and they were so unique and so special and so individual, and they really give you a more complete understanding of that period and the experiences for these family members. And then I guess as researchers, we're kind of interested in how we can kind of look at that collectively. And there are these central themes that just emerge across them, which was really gratifying to see. You'll want to think about how to record your oral history. And these can get as sort of detailed and technical as you want. We're one of our partners that we're fortunate to get to work with on this project is Utah Public Radio, and so they come with a host of equipment and recording devices and microphones, and they have a sound guy that goes around and clicks and whistles in rooms to make sure that there's a perfect spot for the oral history to take place. Do you need that? No, you don't need that. If you can get that, it's amazing. And there are many of opportunities to actually go and have your conversations professionally recorded. But simply, most of us have these now, our smartphones, and they have excellent recording devices on them. And so that's a great place. Many people have access to voice recorders or your computer, so those will work just as well. We actually employ our smartphones with an app to record during our road shows when we're just sort of having conversations and documenting the objects just as a backup so that we have that entire story. So your smartphones are excellent recording devices. They also work well, I will say, for capturing video. So you might think about that. Are you interested in just audio recording of your oral history, or do you want to have that video recording? I have to say, from a personal side, my family's always been they've sort of been amateur documentarians. So my grandfather was an amateur photographer and videographer before there was audio to film. And so we have lots of family video of us kind of growing up and as kids, and then even sort of now when I get to go back and look at those, it's really quite neat to see my sibling and my cousins and my aunts and uncles and my grandparents in a way that I just I don't remember all of those events and all of those times. And so I think that's one of the powers of collecting your own story, is you get to tell it and you get to shape it. And so when I think back of some of these photographs and videos that he took, I kind of am seeing the world through his eyes, right? It was what he was looking at and what he was capturing. So that's also a unique thing to kind of think about, that this oral history is not only about the person telling the story, but about the person who's capturing the oral history account as well. You'll, of course, want to think about a quiet space, a dedicated space, right, where you can sit down and spend some time collecting your oral history. I've always been fascinated with objects and stuff. And I find myself, since I was a very small child, drawn to museums and just, and in particular, sort of history and anthropological museums. So the object has a lot of interesting dynamic to me. So this one reason why this project is so fun for me, I guess, to work on and rewarding to get to be a part of, is that I've always had this fascination with objects, and not just with um, their tangible side, you know, the just sort of physicality of them, but of all the associated meanings and stories that go along with objects. And so when we're in these road shows, the object serves a purpose that really does bridge us, sort of, in our case, researchers or students, with the person who's come in and brought in their object. But it bridges us in a way that where we can connect to their experience. So I think that if we were doing more of our own family oral histories, and documenting those family stories using objects, I think you're going to find some really powerful ways to connect with them. Sometimes a photograph, um, we've all probably experienced this, where we were sitting around looking at a family photo album. Um, I can't think of too many households that I've walked in that didn't have photographs on their walls or on their fridges. These that we tend to kind of surround ourselves with these images in our memories. And so being able to just kind of pull out something tangible like that, and then just start from there, asking the simple question, you know, what do you remember about this? Or do you have a memory associated with this object or this photograph? Or can you remember when you received that letter? What were you doing? You know, it just opens up a whole lot of questions, and avenues of which you can enter into a person's experience to get them to really tell that story. So maybe think about that when you're setting up a time to talk to a family member, um, about maybe something that's in the house that you're like, I just don't know what that is. Why do they keep that? You know, there's a story there. There is a story there. I'm sitting here at home, and last fall my mother gave me my grandfather's desk, so that's actually where I'm sitting, and she left the stuff that he left in his drawers. And so there's all these really kind of like pens from the local bank, and the the service gas station there, and but then there's also the photos from his wallet, and there's a picture of me when I was a child and a picture of my mother when she was a child. And that's it, that's in there. And so there's all this story amongst my sister and my cousins and my mother's brothers' wives and anybody else in this wallet photo album. It's just the two of you. And so we have this running family joke about that. But wouldn't that be great to be able to ask those questions? And I can't ask those questions any longer. Instead, I get to make up this story. But anyway, there's this fun part of objects that can really open up, I think, a conversation. Once you have your oral history, it's great to be able to share that. And there are so many wonderful ways in which you can do that. Obviously, within your family, you can bundle them and distribute them as gifts. But there's also ways in which you can archive that story, so that other people outside of your family might want to hear or be able to listen and learn from your story. We're using, one of the things that we've learned from this project there's a whole host of digital tools out there to help you. One that we're particularly fond of is this one called Otter AI. And what it does is it's recording the audio of a conversation, and then it's spitting out a transcript. So it's actually transcribing it into a digital file for you, so that you can go in and edit, and then you'd have a written account of that oral history as well. There are many of those out there to choose from. But that's one way in which you can take your oral history and be able to share it with other people. There's fun assignments that you might assign to other family members, like creating a podcast and having a conversation about your oral history, or creating videos. One thing that I'm finding a little bit difficult and would love to hear some feedback on is how people collecting their own family stories, where might they be able to archive those in public archives? Certainly, we are interested in your story. And so our project is working with Utah Public Radio, and I put their website there to document those stories. We're hoping that our archive will be sort of a living resource where people can continue to add to the archive. And so we would love to be able to help you archive your story. Other things you might consider are creating websites where you can share your family stories. And there's this program that's actually coming to Utah here, I think this in the Logan area anyway, this later this spring, called StoryCorps, where you can go in to the radio station, they have a mobile station, and record a conversation with them, and then it gets archived in the Library of Congress. I'm not sure if I have enough time to listen to this oral history, so I think I'll go on, and if we have time, we can come back. Maybe I'll turn it back to Sue here.
Just going to say, so one of the things I tell my students all the time, and the value of doing oral history, the value of trying to get everyone's stories down, is that we know what generals think about their military experiences, right? But the vast majority of people who participate in war, support those who are on active duty, get lost, and therefore we don't actually understand our past in all of its complexity and richness. So we're recording these stories and recording these objects because we want to preserve them. We want to make them accessible. We want to make it possible for future students and our teachers at whatever level, middle school and high school, as well as community college, all the way up, to learn from the information that we've been privileged to hear and that's been shared with us. So we are working with really amazing folks at the USU libraries to build a living digital archive that's going to make accessible the photographs and objects that we've recorded, but also the stories and the meaning that's accompanied them. And so we are really excited to again, work with our students to build this so that people can look them up, so that people are interested in a particular event can learn more about it from a really personal family community perspective. And this is the sort of second part of the project that we're working towards building and trying to find a way so that it will be possible for those of you who might be listening, who are recording your own stories with veterans or family members, to upload those stories so that we can include those in this community archive.
And we thought, since we are speaking with a group of the from the Salt Lake County Library, and you are avid readers, I'm sure, our project also hosts a book club kit that can be checked out, where we've designed some discussion prompts, some additional resources, curated some additional resources with the help of faculty at Utah State University's Department of English and History, as well as some writing prompts for you that are all part of this book club kit that is available for free. We have the books with these materials that we mail out to you. Sue and I are happy to sort of facilitate a discussion, or just let you have your discussion on your own. We've had a number of these conversations that have been really just well received. It's a fabulous book. Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carry. He himself is a Vietnam veteran, and he draws on that experience in this account, fictional account that he presents in The Things They Carried. And it's a book that you need to discuss. It's I think of it as somewhat of an intense book to read on your own, and so it's something that you'll want to have a conversation with a group of people to really be able to unpack and draw on his experiences. Let's see if that's, my computer seems slow. There we go. We invite you to join us and be part of the project. I'm happy to provide you with some more information about those book club kits. But we also invite you to join us at any of our upcoming road shows. We will be at the Fort Douglas Military Museum this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We invite you to just, if you're a little dubious about what we're all about, come see us, come talk to us. But if you're ready to have a story recorded, the folks from Utah Public Radio will be set up and taking oral histories. Our students will be there to document objects and collect your object stories as well. And then in the fall, we'll start traveling the state again. We'll be back in the Salt Lake area in September 17th at the USU Salt Lake Center in Taylorsville there. And then we move on to Moab in October and out to, I say out, but out to the historic Wendover Airfield on November 5th. And I will leave it there. Anything else, Sue, that you'd like to say?
No, just that we hope that this piques your curiosity, and we hope to see some folks there on Saturday. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Susan and Molly. That was really great. Thank you for this project as well and all the work you're doing. And everybody remember, they're going to be at the Fort Douglas Museum this Saturday and in September in Taylorsville. So that's really great. To our attendees, if you've got any comments you'd like to make, or our speakers, if you've got any last things that you'd like to add, would love to hear any last thoughts.
I'll just say thank you, Heather, for putting that, or wait, sorry, maybe that was Emily. Yes, Emily, for putting that note from that Ancestry allows you to develop family trees and upload your stories there as well. That's a great resource.
Okay, and I did have one question for you guys. One of the things I have noticed when doing interviews myself, or having my dad do an interview for me, is when he was asking my grandmother questions, her sister was in the same room and she would chime in her memories, and that kind of broadened the information that they shared. Do you think that would also be a good idea for when talking to veterans?
Well, we have had that opportunity where, in fact, we love being able to facilitate conversations with these oral history accounts, and several of ours, they have been one-on-one, where one of our students is asking questions and the participant is sort of answering and providing a conversation. But we've also had several instances where families came in together and recorded their stories. And so I think it will just kind of depend on your goals. But I find those pretty compelling stories to listen to. Maybe Sue has something to add there.
I think this is a both and. I think there are certain questions you get when there is a one-on-one, and things that come from that kind of individual perspective. But I also think like we've had a set of siblings talking about their brother who participated in the Second World War, and they had different kinds of memories, and they were sort of prompting different kinds of stories. And so I think if you have the time and patience to do both, I think I would try both, because I think you'll get slightly different accounts. And I'm a big fan of just the more that we can record, the more we can preserve, the more we'll understand.
Thank you. I really did like hearing what my grandmother's sister had to say about what my grandmother was saying and how it was a little bit different. It gave a little more of their personality too. So I'm glad you think that would be a good one to add to your questions. All right, well, the recording for this presentation will be posted to the Salt Lake County website within a few days, and you'll be able to access it for a limited time. So please do invite those that you may know who weren't able to be here tonight, but who would like to see this presentation to go there. We'd be really excited for them to see it. I'd also like to point out that at the library, you can access Ancestry.com for free. So please do come visit us and use our resources. Again, thank you so much to our presenters. We're so happy you were able to be here. Thank you, attendees. We're so happy you were able to be here. And thank you again. We're going to go ahead and call that it for tonight.